Hey YouTube, it is October, which means it's time to juice apples. If you've never tried this, it's not hard, but it is time consuming, especially if you like to filter the juice the way I do. I don't like a lot of sediment in the juice. If you don't mind sediment, this could be a much quicker process. I am going to walk you through, I've already started because it's a 2-day process to get them all juiced through the probably oldest juice maker still in service on the planet. So I've already started, but I thought I would jump in and start the video by showing you some of the tools that you'll need if you're going to be juicing and canning your own apple juice. I don't add any sugar or any water. So this is organic apples. We have two kinds of apples. I have, and I'll put the varieties on the screen. We have a reddish one and we have two trees that are the green apple. And this year the red apples on the tree got completely obliterated by birds before I got to them. Anyway, so I ended up getting about 3 5-gallon buckets full of apples. So I'm going to show you at the end how much apple juice are you getting from 15 gallons of picked apples in buckets. And you might be surprised. We'll see in the end, was it worth it? The amount of time that you're spending and how much juice you're going to get. But it is concentrated because what I do is I juice them through the juicer, and that's all that goes in the jars. So, because I don't want to add water, I don't want to take more space up with more jars. So it's very concentrated by the time you're done. If you want to water it down when you pour it out of the bottle, you can, but this is just juice from apples going in jars. That's it. I use quart jars. I'm probably going to use narrow mouth jars because this one is just out, so I have it. You are going to need non-reusable canning jar caps, and they have the little sealing ring that is going to be going on the jar. Then you have a reusable ring that will be going on there to seal it. You're going to need a jar lifter. In all my canning videos, we have the jar lifter because you have to be able to pull the hot jars out of the hot water when you're done. And this is a super cool little tool that is a magnet. And you use it, and especially if you do like I do, I put these caps in warm water while the canning process is getting started so that this compound here is a little bit soft. And I don't think you have to do that anymore with modern canning, but if you do put them in hot water, there's a trick to it. Use the little magnet, and I'll show you a trick about that I love when we get to that part of the video. But there's a trick to not burning your fingers when you do this. The other thing that goes with the canning goodies is a canning funnel, just so that you have a nice funnel to pour things in the jars. And you will need a measuring tape at the end to measure headspace, and I'll show you that when we get to it. But don't try to eyeball headspace on jars, that distance between the top of the juice or the liquid and the top of the jar. In 32 years of canning, I've never eyeballed a ½ an inch and been right, so I just decided to start measuring. You will need a big knife to cut the apples up, but the juicer that I have is wonderful. I don't peel them. I don't fuss with a lot of fixing the apples before they go in the juicer. I cut them in half or quarters, and I will get rid of the core and anything that is blemished or things you don't, obviously there's going to be parts you don't want to use. Get rid of that, but you don't have to peel them and do a bunch of fancy stuff. I throw them right in the juicer. You will need some kind of a spoon because we're going to be removing foam as the juice comes out into the jars. And then for filtering, and this is where I get really picky about it. If you don't mind sediment in your juice, or some people like that, I really don't. So I strain them through. These are actually paint strainers that you can get probably at Napa, which is weird, but that's what it is. They're 1 micron. This is a little screen. It's a 1 micron strainer. I start with that to get my first filtering, and I'll run it through, obviously through like a sieve, but then those. And then at the end, to get them really, really fine, I put them through coffee filters. And that is where the time-consuming part of this process comes in. So that is all you're going to need. And we are going to turn the camera around and get busy doing the apples, and I will show you how this whole process comes together. And then at the end, you can let me know in the comments if you thought it was worth it or not. And I'm going to guess, we'll see if I'm right. I'm going to do this ahead of time before we're finished. I'm going to guess that of the 3 5-gallon buckets of apples that I'm starting with, I'll bet you that I will end up with 8. I'm guessing 8. We're putting money on 8 jars, 8 quarts, maybe 9 quarts of juice that we will get from 15 gallons of apples. So was it worth it? We'll see. So what I start with is I'll take the apples out of the buckets and dump them in the sink. And then from there, I'm going to give them a really good rinse and put them in a strainer just to drain off any of the extra water. When I cut these open, I'm going to be trimming all of the bits that are usable and putting them in my juicer. So we're gonna move over to here. I have possibly the oldest juicer still in service. It's a Juiceman 2, and I've had that for, gosh, 20 years, 25 years. I don't even remember when I got that. So long ago. So what I'm going to do is I'll bring apples over to here, and I'm going to start cutting and separating, and I'll separate the parts I don't want to use into this bowl, which will go out to the pigs, and then the parts I'm going to use are going to go in this bowl. What is amazing about that juicer, and I don't know if you can still find this one on the market. It's literally that old, but it has like a micro fine, let me see if I can get to it. It has a micro fine screen in there, that. And when everything goes through that and comes out into the pulp area, all that goes through this and comes out is juice. So you can literally put these in with the skins. You can put them in with the seeds. You could put them in without doing much to them, and you are going to get just juice out of this spout. So I'm going to start cutting and sorting these into pieces that we're going to run through the juicer, and I'll just quickly show you that. And then the rest of this process is really, really slow because it has to strain. I like my juice to be super, super clear. So I strain it through several different processes to get it where it's crystal clear, and it takes about 1 million man-hours to do it. So I won't subject you to all of that. So you can see this is about as clean as I get these. When I just trim them up, and I'll trim around any of the blemishes, but you can put them right in as long as they'll fit in that. And you just push the button down below, and you've got a pusher there. And you can see how nice and clear and beautiful that juice is. As it sits, it is going to oxidize and turn brown, more like the color of apple juice that you see when you buy it in the store. So don't be alarmed if it changes color from a beautiful clear green to a brown. That's just the natural oxidation process happening. And what you do once you have enough built up in here, I will dump that into a bucket, and that goes out to the pigs as well. As you go along, once this starts to fill up, you'll see that it separates into much clearer juice that's underneath, and then some sort of foam on top. And so what I do is just come and take, you can do a slotted spoon, but I like to do it with just a regular spoon. You can see the clear stuff underneath of it that's nice juice. And I try and just as quietly as possible take it off without disturbing it, and just dump it in a bowl next to it. So we're just kind of try to skim that off the top as carefully as possible without redistributing too much of it into the juice that's underneath. So this is what I got off of basically 5 gallons of apples. And this is about 10 cups of unfiltered juice. And I'm going to let these sit quite a while because we want that sediment to settle. And you can see it starting to settle down to the bottom in this one that I did first. And then we want to leave as much of that behind when we start to strain this. Otherwise, if you just pour this right through strainers, like this one's the most recent one, way too much sediment, and it will literally clog up any filter that you're trying to filter through, and you'll go through so many filter situations. So I'm going to let these sit and let all of that settle down, and then we're going to carefully take off and pour off the bit on the top. So we'll see what we're left with after these settle. So there's 10 cups of unfiltered, and then we're going to do 2 more 5-gallon buckets worth of apples, and then we'll see in the final run through, we'll see how many actual quart jars of juice we get. Okay, I took the first one of those that had settled and poured it very slowly, just leaving the sediment behind, and poured it into this pan through a strainer. And I am just going to now take this, the first straining, and put it through, this is a paint strainer, actually it's a 1 micron strainer. So this is the next step I'll do, is just carefully pour that through a 1 micron strainer. And once I have all of the juice run through one of these strainers, and it will probably take more than one, and it can take a lot more than one strainer. So be prepared to use a lot of straining material, a lot of coffee filters or these paint strainers, and that's straining down into the clean Pyrex. And we're just going to keep adding it And then once it gets where it'll back up where it won't go through the strainer, then you have to start with a fresh new strainer. After that, I will run it through coffee filters, and this is the part that takes a really long time. And once we have it strained through coffee filters into the pan, then this will be what goes on the stove to heat up to go in the jars. So after what seems like many hours, this is how much juice I got out of 3 5-gallon buckets of apples. And much filtering. You can see how lovely and clear it is. So we have it on the stove. We're going to turn it up to medium-ish heat, and I'm going to put a probe thermometer in, and we want to heat this up to 190. We do not want to boil it, but we want to get it up to 190 and just hold it at 190 for 5 minutes. And then it's ready to go in the jars, and then it will go into a water bath canner, which I have going right here. This is my canning pot, but we're not using it as a pressure canner. We're just going to put the jars in this water and make sure the water covers them by at least 2 inches. And then we're going to boil them in a boiling water bath for 15 minutes because of my altitude. And due to your altitude, check your instructions, because if you're at a higher altitude or a lower altitude, your processing times will vary. While we're waiting for the juice to heat up and the water in the big pot to boil, I'll show you the trick we talked about with the magnet. I have a little pot of warm, extremely warm water, not boiling, to put these caps in, just to soften up that sealing compound, just because it's an old habit of mine that I never quit doing. If you're going to put these in warm water and you're going to use the magnet to get them out, if you can see how they're stacked in the box, they come kind of puzzle stacked together. And if you grab 2, they're stuck together. If you do that when they're in water and then you try and there's a little vacuum of water that will hold them together, they're hard enough to get apart. But if you do that with a little burst of hot water, that will burn your fingers. So my trick that I've learned over the years is to put these in the water alternating. So one side up, one side down, the next one going up, the next one facing down. And then when you go to grab one out, you're just going to get one. So it's my old timer trick. So let's go in the water. And we're going to get ready to fill jars as soon as this gets up to 190 for 5 minutes. There is one more little trick I'm going to show you if you are water bath canning and pressure canning, but this one especially because it's going to have water that's covering the jars. If you have really hard water, which we do, if you don't want to have your jars come out with that dusty sort of coating that you will get from really hard water, it's just a deposit that'll be on the jars and the lids, I take literally just regular vinegar, and I don't measure it, but I just kind of give it a splash in the water that the jars are going to go in for the boiling water bath. And that seems to do the trick, to have the jars come out and not be coated with that white kind of dusty coating that you'll get from hard water. Otherwise, I mean, you can just wipe it off, but it just saves you a step. That is just sat for 5 minutes at 190 degrees. You have to kind of watch it because you don't want the temp to creep up too much. And I just take a measuring cup, and you've got your jars and a canning funnel, and we're going to fill these. We want a headspace of 1/4 of an inch from the top of the jar. Use a measuring tape. You will not be able to guess. I've never guessed it right in 32 years of canning. I've never eyeballed the measurement and been right. So I just have gotten into the habit of measuring it with a measuring tape. And especially in a lot of jars when you're canning, if you overfill them, you will end up, in the canning process, you will end up forcing the liquid in the jar up, out, over the top, and you'll end up with food particles and stuff here on this rim. And you don't want that because it will cause that lid to not seal down to the jar because there's food trapped in it. So measuring tape, I know this one's not right. It's actually really hot too, so I can't hold it up for you to see. Too hot. So 1/4 of an inch on this one, and the jar's really hot, so I can't actually hold it up to show you. So what I do once they're filled to within the headspace, take a damp paper towel or a clean washcloth, and I will show you on a dry jar, but just go around the edge of that and just make sure it's wiped clean before you put the cap on. So we're going to do that. This is where you use your little magnet and reach into your hot water and grab just one. See, it's got hot water on it. You don't want that dripping on your hand. That goes on the jar, and I'll show you again on a dry jar because that jar is full of hot 190 degree juice and the glass is too hot. So take your jar with juice, set that on, and take one of your caps, and you're not wrenching these on as tight as you can, just finger tight where you hit resistance and just give it a little push past that. So you're not trying to, hold them on because you're so strong. The sealing process will happen in the jar once it's been processed. So you just need to give it that little twist past the resistance. So I'm going to go ahead and finish filling these, and then I'll show you the jars going in the water bath. But look how beautiful this one looks, all filled. Look how clear. And that is because I strained it through a coffee filter. So if you want really, really beautifully clear juice, take the time to run it through coffee filters to strain it. All right, so I've just finished filling these, and I will tell you a little trick, because obviously you're not always going to have exactly how many quarts. We got 2, 4, 6, 7, and I guessed 8, but we drank a bunch of this last night. So I was probably almost exactly on, pretty close. Good guess. So 8 is what we would have got if we hadn't drank some. The trick is, if you find you get these filled and you have one, my last one was only about 3/4 full. So what I do when that happens, and it pretty much always will happen, you can either put it in the fridge and just have it to drink fresh. But if I want to can all of it, I will cheat a little bit and level everything out by taking some juice out of other jars and then topping them all up with just like a couple of tablespoons of water to make up the difference. Because, as I said, these are extremely concentrated. This is just the juice right out of the apples with nothing added. So it's not a problem to add a little bit of water. Because I think an actual apple juice recipe, like I'm using the Ball canning book, and it actually says to, you know, process them with water. So my version is very concentrated. So that's my little trick, so that you get nice, even, full, beautiful jars of juice. So we're going to get these over into the hot water. We've got the jar lifter. You want to just grab it by the neck like that and carry it right over and put it in the water. And if you watched my canning plums video, you saw that I had a jar break in that process. I've never had juice jars break. That would be just an absolute sad nightmare. And this worked out nicely because my canning pot will hold exactly 7 large jars. And that is exactly what we got. We have 7 quarts in there, and you can see the water line. You can see where my water line usually is, but I'll just use this as sort of a measure. Definitely have at least 2 inches over the lids. So we're going to turn this up to high and get it boiling. And as soon as it reaches boiling, I'll set the timer for 15 minutes. And then we're going to turn the heat off and let these sit for 5 more minutes just to finish kind of processing in the hot water as the temperature cools down. And then we'll take them out, sit them on the counter overnight to continue sealing, and then tomorrow we will label them and put them in the cabinet for wonderful winter juice. These have just cooled down for 5 minutes after we turned off the boiling water bath. This is where you are going to need your jar lifter, and I try not to disturb the actual rings in here when we pull these jars out. So you want to go down past the ring and just grab that by the jar. Just the neck of that jar instead of the ring, because that is not, you know, it's not sealed yet. It's just sitting. It's going to seal as it cools. And then we just carefully carry that over to a towel and let them sit. And as those sit, you will hear an audible pop as these lids seal. They're going to pop down. And if you start canning, that will be one of the most satisfying sounds you'll ever learn to listen for. Look how pretty and clear those are. So if you love the idea of very nice, filtered, clear, beautiful apple juice, straight organic, right out of the apples, this is what you will get if you do that. These are just a little bit of water added at the end. There's one. Did you hear that pop? This is just straight, pure apple juice in jars. So there you have it. There's the apple juice I made, and we are going to use this for beautiful drinks this winter. And it's very special, so we kind of break it out for special occasions. We don't just guzzle this with breakfast or anything. So if you would like to try making apple juice, I would highly recommend it, but now's your chance to vote on whether this was worth it. So we got the equivalent of 8. I was right. We got the equivalent of 8 quarts out of 3, they're still popping, out of 3 5-gallon buckets of apples, and quite a bit of picking, you know, up on a ladder, up and down the ladder, bring in all the apples, do all of this, and we got 2 gallons of juice. So comment down below if you think it was worth it or not. See you in the next video.